Imagine lying beneath a sky so wide it feels endless. A sky that has carried the weight of every age before us, every silence, every forgotten story of the earth. Tonight, we step once more into that stillness, into the spaces where science and wonder blur into mystery. Before we begin, I'd love to know, from where are you listening right now? And what time is it where you are? Because every corner of the world hears this story in a different hour of the night. And if these journeys into deep time bring you comfort, I invite you to gently subscribe so you can return to these quiet explorations whenever you wish. What if every step you take leaves behind not only a footprint on the ground you know, but also an echo in a place you cannot see, a quiet reflection moving as you move, breathing as you breathe, existing just beyond the veil of perception? Scientists have long asked whether the universe might not be alone, whether the vast silence of space is only half of the story, and whether beside us, perhaps closer than our own shadow, there could be another universe, a dark mirror that we have never touched. We live surrounded by familiar rules, the pull of gravity, the warmth of the sun, the slow rhythm of our earth turning beneath the sky. Yet every law of physics that feels so constant might be written in symmetry with something we cannot measure. Nature loves balance, but in our universe, that balance is broken. There are more particles than antiparticles, more matter than antimatter, more light than shadow. Why is this so? Could it be that the balance is not lost but simply hidden, waiting on the other side of a glass we cannot break? Imagine a mirror held against your life, not one of silver and glass, but one made of silence. In it, there might be another earth, another sky, another ocean resting in its own gravity. Perhaps in that earth, mountains rise where ours have fallen. Perhaps seas cover the plains where our deserts stretch empty. And perhaps in that world, there is another version of you, walking, thinking, wondering if they too are being reflected. Science whispers the idea through the language of particles. Some theories suggest that for every familiar atom of hydrogen and carbon, there could be a hidden twin, a shadow atom that does not interact with light, that passes unseen through space and stone and even our bodies. We call it dark matter because we cannot see it, yet we know it must be there, shaping galaxies, bending gravity, holding the stars in their spirals. What if dark matter is not just unseen particles, but the bones of a mirror world stitched together alongside ours? Invisible but near. It is strange to imagine that as you sit quietly, the air around you might be filled not only with molecules of oxygen and nitrogen, but with overlapping forms of a dark atmosphere, pressed against ours like two sheets of paper. You cannot feel it, you cannot taste it, but perhaps it is there, shaping you in ways you do not notice. What if every time we look into the stillness of the night sky, we are staring into a vast ocean layered on another ocean, two realities, sharing the same space without ever touching? Our minds are trained to believe in what the senses reveal. We see, we hear, we touch, and we call it real. But perhaps reality is not confined to what our eyes can catch. Perhaps we are only tuned to one frequency, while beside us, on a wavelength we cannot hear, another universe hums softly, running parallel with ours. Maybe we are not alone in the way we thought. not because of distant stars or faraway civilizations, but because of a neighbor so close it has always been with us, invisible, patient, and silent. And if that is true, then what does it mean for who we are? Could your reflection, the one in the mirror you face each morning, be more than glass and light? Could it be a faint reminder that another version of you might stand there, unseen, in their own world, wondering the same thing? The thought is unsettling and yet strangely comforting, the possibility that we are not solitary at all, but forever doubled, forever shared. In the end, the question is not whether the mirror universe is real, but whether we are ready to notice it. For perhaps the greater truth is not in evidence but in possibility, not in proof but in wonder. And as we drift further into this thought, we find ourselves asking, if a shadow universe exists, if every atom here has a twin there, then what is the nature of the bridge between them? Could there be a place where the glass is thin enough for one world to whisper into the other? And yet, if the reflection can be this close, almost breathing with us, then how do we begin to imagine the physics of its silence, the laws that bind it, the science that hides it? And yet, if the reflection can be this close, almost breathing with us, then how do we begin to imagine the physics of its silence, the laws that bind it, the science that hides it? Physicists speak of symmetry, of the way nature prefers balance, and how particles seem to hint at partners we have never seen. We live in a world where electrons orbit, where protons hold their place, where atoms combine into the long history of stone and sea. And yet some of those same laws whisper that a missing twin could be hiding nearby. This is the quiet field of particle physics, a place where equations outnumber certainties and where imagination meets experiment. The idea is simple but unsettling. What if, for every atom in your hand, there exists another atom, a dark twin, that mirrors its mass, its charge, its spin, but one that does not interact with light? You cannot see it, you cannot touch it, but it is there, invisible yet balanced. This is the idea of mirror matter, a shadow version of the building blocks we know, drifting in parallel with our own. It would mean that galaxies of dark stars, worlds of dark stone, and oceans of dark water might exist right beside us. Yet we remain blind because photons, the carriers of light, simply do not cross between the two realms. We already know that most of the universe is invisible. Astronomers measure stars and galaxies and then measure the gravity that moves them, and the numbers do not match. There is more gravity than there should be, as though something massive is there, pulling quietly but hidden from every telescope we build. This unseen mass is what we call dark matter, a phrase that captures our ignorance as much as our curiosity. Could dark matter be nothing more than the shadow of a mirror universe tugging at us with its gravity, whispering of its presence without ever stepping into view? The thought opens into wonder, because gravity is the only law that seems unwilling to stay inside boundaries. It is universal, flowing across dimensions, perhaps even slipping between universes. If there is a mirror cosmos beside ours, its gravity would still reach across, folding into the shape of galaxies, binding our stars in spirals, sculpting the large-scale architecture of the universe. Maybe we are already feeling the touch of another world every time we look at the clustering of galaxies and the quiet pull that keeps them from flying apart, Maybe what we call dark matter halos around galaxies are not halos at all, but the overlapping weight of a world we cannot see. But how do we begin to test such an idea? Physicists look for anomalies in particle experiments, tiny breaks in the expected pattern. They watch isotopes decay and measure their rates, wondering if, in those brief moments, a particle slips sideways into a hidden world. Some experiments have even found small hints, anomalies in neutron behavior, patterns in particle disappearance that do not fit the rules we know. Are these errors in measurement, or are they the briefest cracks in the glass where something passes from our universe into its reflection? The science remains unsettled, fragile, yet its uncertainty is what makes it alive. And yet it is not only physics that calls us toward the question. There is something deeply human in the idea that we might be surrounded by shadows we cannot touch. We are creatures of perception, anchored to light and sound, and so much of reality is filtered through what our senses allow. But what if our senses are not enough? What if, just as deep time erases fossils beneath layers of stone, the fabric of reality itself erases half of existence from our view? Could it be that our blindness is not failure, but design? That we were never meant to see the whole picture in this way? The mirror universe becomes less of a theory and more of a metaphor for silence. It is not absence, but presence beyond reach. It is the kind of silence you feel in caves beneath the earth, where sound does not travel, or in the deep ocean, where light does not reach. A silence so complete it becomes its own kind of fullness. Perhaps the physics of shadows is not about proving, but about learning to sit with what we cannot prove, to let the mystery expand in us like breath. And yet, even as we drift through this thought, there remains a tension, a quiet erosion between certainty and speculation. Because if a mirror universe does exist, if dark matter is truly matter unseen, then the story of our cosmos is only half told. What we call reality may be no more than the bright face of a coin, while its darker side remains pressed against us, hidden, inseparable, unacknowledged. And the more we wonder, the more the question rises. If the physics of shadows can shape galaxies, then what other echoes might they hold? Echoes not only of matter, but of memory, of history, of time itself. And if the physics of shadows can shape galaxies, then what other echoes might they hold? Echoes not only of matter, but of memory, of history, of time itself. For at the heart of science lies a question that is older than any telescope, older than the first stone chipped into a tool. Why does nature crave balance? Everywhere we look, symmetry reveals itself as the hidden preference of the universe. The wings of a butterfly folding in perfect reflection. The branching of trees reaching outward like mirrored rivers of green. The quiet geometry of snowflakes forming around a speck of dust. Symmetry feels natural, almost inevitable. And yet, when we turn our gaze to the deepest laws of physics, to the mathematics that describe the birth of particles and the decay of elements, we see something broken. The universe as we know it is built on imbalance. In the first moments after the Big Bang, matter and antimatter should have been created in equal measure, perfect partners in a cosmic dance. But that is not what we see. Instead, there is a strange excess, a surplus of matter that allowed stars to form, planets to grow, and eventually life to emerge. Antimatter, for reasons we do not fully understand, almost vanished, erased, as though it had been brushed away. Why would a universe born in symmetry end in asymmetry? Could the missing reflection still be somewhere, hidden but intact, balancing what appears broken here? Physicists imagine that perhaps the symmetry is not gone, but only silent, stored in a mirror world we cannot reach, a world where the imbalance of our side is corrected, where the antimatter missing from our story still exists, quietly shaping its own. In this view, the mirror universe is not simply a shadow, but a necessity, the missing half of an equation. Like a fossil buried deep beneath the shifting plates of the earth, its presence may be hidden, but the imprint of its form still presses against us, urging us to notice the gap. We know from geology that time itself carves away balance. Mountains rise only to crumble. Oceans spread and then close as tectonic plates drift. Fossils of once living creatures dissolve into dust, their symmetry erased by decay and erosion. Entropy ensures that order fades, that symmetry dissolves into fragments. And yet, at the smallest scales, in the equations of physics, symmetry appears again as if it were the universe's original language, a rhythm beneath the noise. Could it be that this rhythm continues, not in our world, but in another, balancing what we have lost, preserving the harmony we no longer see? It is tempting to think of symmetry not only as a physical law, but as a form of memory, just as rocks carry the memory of oceans that vanished millions of years ago. Perhaps the mirror universe carries the memory of a symmetry erased here. Maybe it holds what we cannot hold, keeps what we cannot keep, remembers what we have forgotten. And if that is true, then the brokenness we perceive is not truly broken, but part of a larger balance, one written across two universes instead of one. We find ourselves circling the same quiet question. If symmetry is nature's hidden preference, why do we only see half of it? Is it because the other half is truly lost, erased into silence? Or is it because we are only looking in the wrong direction, our eyes tuned to light, while the reflection hides in darkness? Maybe symmetry is not gone, but waiting for us to understand that the mirror we seek is not in front of us, but beside us, invisible and silent. And yet, if the universe is indeed balanced by a hidden reflection, then its silence must have meaning. Silence not as absence, but as a choice. Silence not because nothing is there, but because the laws of physics do not allow the two halves to meet. We live in the brightness of matter, while its twin lives in shadow. Two realities, equal, opposite, and forever apart, and still the mystery deepens. Because symmetry itself seems alive, bending and breaking, shifting and reforming. If balance can hide so well, what else might be concealed behind the veil? What other laws, what other histories, what other truths might exist in the quiet reflection we cannot touch? Gravity does not respect boundaries, not the ones we imagine with language, nor the ones we draw on maps, nor even the ones we try to trace across the fabric of the universe. It drifts, invisible yet absolute, stretching across light years and centuries, a soft force, so constant we forget it is there, until we lean too far, or drop something fragile, or watch the tide inhale and exhale against the shore. And if this quiet pull can slip across oceans and mountains, why should it not also drift across worlds we cannot see? Perhaps just beyond the veil of what we call reality, gravity is whispering to another plane, pulling and being pulled, to unseen hands touching through the fabric of existence, without ever meeting face to face. When we speak of dark matter, we speak of mystery with equations. We speak of galaxies spinning too fast, of stars holding their shape when by all logic they should scatter, of invisible scaffolding that binds clusters together. Science tells us something is there, something vast, something that outweighs all visible matter by far. And yet, for all its weight, it does not shine, it does not glow, it does not reveal itself in light. It is gravity we feel, and only gravity, like an echo from a neighbor we have never met, heard through the thin walls of the cosmos. Could it be that what we call dark matter is nothing more than the fingerprints of another universe, pressing gently against ours, leaving impressions in the stars? Imagine it for a moment, a mirror universe layered against this one, so close that the folds of space-time overlap in places, so close that the weight of their worlds leans into ours, pulling without touch, like the moon pulling tides it will never see. In such a vision, every spiral galaxy is not merely alone but partnered, every orbit a dance with something unseen, every movement a duet across dimensions. If so, then the universe is not singular but paired, not solitary but doubled, like a reflection that is almost, but not quite, the same dot. And if this is true, what does it mean for us, for the small lives we lead on this pale blue planet? Could it be that our own footsteps carry echoes in another world, that our oceans rise and fall, not only for the moon we know, but also for the weight of seas we will never walk upon? Perhaps every falling leaf, every stone that drops into a river, is answering not only to Earth's own pull, but to the quiet persuasion of another Earth, hidden, silent, parallel. It may not be so. It may be that dark matter is something stranger still, a sea of particles we cannot detect, a fabric woven of threads thinner than imagination. Yet the thought lingers, like a dream half remembered upon waking, that maybe we are not alone, even at the level of physics, even at the level of gravity itself, that what we call emptiness is not empty at all, but filled with whispers we cannot yet translate. We forget sometimes that gravity is not strong in the ordinary sense, not like the snap of a magnet or the burn of fire. It is gentle, weak, patient. It only wins because it never stops, because it does not let go, because it stretches across the whole of time without tiring. And in that endless patience, in that eternal reach, might it also bridge not only stars and galaxies, but entire realities? Could it be that the secret to understanding everything lies not in what we see, but in what silently holds us? The unseen bridge between two worlds. Maybe this is why galaxies seem to swirl like painted whirlpools, why clusters gather like drifting islands, why the universe itself bends and curves in ways that light alone cannot explain. Not because space is empty, but because space is full of touch, full of weight, full of hands pressing against us from the other side. Maybe we are not so separate after all. And if gravity has no respect for boundaries, then neither does memory, neither does time. Perhaps what we feel as the pull of the past is just another form of that same whisper, tugging at us from another place, reminding us that no story is ever entirely gone. Perhaps what we lose in this world lingers in another, perhaps what falls here rises there. We cannot know, not yet. But to wonder is to lean closer to the truth, to listen more carefully to the silence. And yet, if this much can be hidden in the pull of every step we take, if this much can be lost in forces we cannot see, what else might be pressing against us from the shadows, shaping us in ways we do not yet understand? The universe still carries its first whisper, a faint afterglow that has traveled for nearly 14 billion years, a radiation so soft that it falls not in light we can see, but in the cool microwaves that surround us. The cosmic microwave. Background, they call it, though the name feels almost too technical for something so haunting, so strangely tender. It is not a sound we can hear, nor a light we can witness with our eyes, and yet it is everywhere, filling every quiet corner of space, seeping even through the walls around us at this very moment. It is the oldest message the cosmos has written, a frozen echo of a beginning we cannot quite touch but can almost feel. When we lean close enough, when scientists first tuned their instruments to the sky and heard the static hum, they did not know they were brushing against the skin of creation. They thought perhaps it was noise, a flaw in the wires, a smear of dust on the antenna. But the sound would not fade, and the glow would not vanish. It was coming from every direction, from above, below, behind, ahead, an omnipresent fog of ancient heat. What we see now as a pattern on their instruments is nothing less than the first light to ever break free. The last trace of a fire so great it filled everything and left no shadows behind. And yet this glow is not perfectly smooth. It carries scars, slight ripples in its texture, delicate variations like brushstrokes on an endless canvas. They are tiny, fractions of a degree, so subtle that they might seem meaningless. And yet those faint irregularities became the seeds of galaxies. Without them, perhaps nothing would have clumped together. Nothing would have gathered mass. Nothing would have cooled into stars, planets, oceans, and us. Those flaws, those cosmic wrinkles, are why there is something instead of nothing. But within that map of light, there are also deeper mysteries, anomalies that do not quite fit, cold spots larger than models predict, strange alignments that stretch across billions of light years, as though someone had traced lines with an unseen hand. Some see them as statistical accidents, coincidences in the chaos of probability. Others wonder if they are fingerprints from something beyond our own universe, hints that another realm may have brushed against ours long ago, leaving subtle bruises on the fabric of our sky. Could it be that the cosmos we know is not alone, that it once pressed against another like two bubbles touching in an endless foam? If so, what do those faint marks really tell us? That our beginning was not singular, but part of a greater, unseen whole. It is tempting to imagine these anomalies as doorways, windows, cracks in the wall of our universe. What lies beyond them we cannot say. Perhaps it is silence. Perhaps it is infinite repetition. Another cosmos with its own scattering of galaxies, its own moments of birth. Or perhaps it is something stranger still, a realm without matter, without light, without time. The microwave background holds no words, only patterns. And so we are left to interpret, to dream, to let speculation drift as slowly as the radiation. itself drifts across the cosmos. When we gaze at this afterglow, we are not looking outward in space so much as backward in time. We are peering into an era when atoms had just begun to form, when hydrogen and helium drifted like newborns in the cooling dark. Every photon that touches our instruments now began its journey when the universe was only 380,000 years old, a fragile infant compared to the endless expansion that followed. Those photons carry no memory of stars, no record of planets, only the faint impression of fire cooling into calm. They are time travelers, carrying with them the silence of beginnings, and yet, for all that they reveal, they also remind us of what is missing. We cannot hear the true first moment, the instant of creation, because the universe was opaque then, its light trapped in a storm of particles. We cannot see what came before, if anything did. The cosmic microwave background is a veil, both gift and barrier, the last page of a story we can read, and the first page of one forever torn out. Still, the marks upon it, those anomalies that haunt the edges of our measurements, ask questions we cannot easily ignore. Are they nothing more than noise, the residue of randomness? Or are they the quiet knock of another universe against ours, a subtle reminder that we are not as singular as we imagine? The thought lingers, fragile and uncertain, like static at the edge of hearing. And if the universe itself can carry echoes across billions of years, then perhaps, just perhaps, there are other echoes waiting still beyond the wall of our sky, faint and unfinished, calling us softly toward them. And if this much can be found in silence, in the faintest whispers of ancient light, then what else might be hiding in the shadows we have not yet learned to see? In the quiet mathematics of the universe, there is a law that never seems to bend, a soft but unyielding truth whispered in the background of every star, every river, every fleeting breath we take. Entropy, the tendency of things to loosen, to unravel, to fall into patterns of greater disorder. Ice melts, iron rusts, the warmth of a fire slips away into the night. Order decays, gently, irreversibly, as though the world itself is exhaling. We see it in our own lives too, in the slow fading of photographs, in the soft wrinkling of skin, in the crumbling stones of forgotten cities. Entropy is not sudden, not violent, but quiet, patient, endlessly persistent. It is the hand of time, smoothing everything down, dissolving sharp edges into sand. And yet, the thought lingers, fragile and unsettling. What if this flow is not absolute? What if the arrow of entropy, this steady path into disorder, is not the only way the cosmos can unfold? Some physicists have wondered whether, beyond the reach of our perception, a mirror world might exist, a reflection not of shape or color, but of time itself. In our universe, the glass shatters and never reassembles. The smoke drifts outward and never returns to the flame. But in the mirror, perhaps the smoke gathers back together, curling inward like a river reversing its course, the glass rising, whole from the floor, as though it had never broken. Could there be such a place, a universe where entropy runs backward? A world where ruins rebuild themselves, stone by stone, where the ashes of a fire knit back into wood, where the fallen leaf climbs again toward its branch. The very act of decay would be inverted, becoming a dance of assembly, an endless return to order. Perhaps to live there would mean to be born in old age, and grow younger with each passing day, memories unspooling in reverse, lives ending not with silence, but with the first miraculous cry of beginning. Scientists remind us that entropy is not just about disorder, but about probability, about the countless ways matter can arrange itself. The reason we see things fall apart is not because they must, but because there are so many more ways for them to do so than to stay perfectly whole. A castle of sand on the shore can stand only in a precise shape, but the tide has infinite possibilities for pulling it down grain by grain. Order is rare, fragile, improbable. Disorder is abundant, inevitable, waiting patiently. And yet, if probability rules us here, might it not favor the opposite elsewhere? Could the mirror universe be one where order is the easy path, where chaos itself is the rare exception, where structures rise not in struggle, but in the natural ease of unfolding? We can almost imagine it. Galaxies spinning not toward heat death, but toward luminous unity. Stars not burning out, but drawing light inward until they glow brighter, steadier, eternal. On that side of the mirror, perhaps entropy is not the slow undoing of all things, but the quiet stitching together of a fabric ever more complete. And if such a realm exists, does it touch ours? Could our two universes be bound together, flowing in opposite directions, like rivers that meet at a hidden delta, invisible yet inseparable? When we look at the night sky and see the light of ancient stars, are we only seeing the past of our own world, or are we glimpsing faintly the order of another? Philosophers have long asked, if time could run in reverse, would we notice? Would a being born in such a place feel that their flow of time was strange, or would it seem natural, inevitable, just as it does to us? Maybe direction itself is only an illusion of memory, the way we stitch moments together into a story that makes sense. Maybe we cannot tell which way time truly flows, only that we are carried along like leaves on a stream. Entropy, then, becomes not just a law, but a mirror, a question that reflects back on us. Why do we cling to the forward arrow, when perhaps there is another? Why do we see the world as falling apart, rather than as endlessly forming, endlessly being made? What if the truth is not one or the other, but both, woven together in some symmetry too vast for us to hold? And if that is so, if every crumbling wall here is a rising tower there, if every falling star is a star reborn in its mirror, then what does it mean for us? Do we too exist twice, once unraveling, once assembling, forever bound, forever entwined? Or are we but the shadow of a greater pattern, glimpsing only one half of the whole? Perhaps, in the end, the question is not which way time runs, but whether we can ever step outside of it to see. Perhaps entropy is not a curse of decay, nor a blessing of order, but the rhythm of existence itself, playing forward and backward, like two hands of a clock moving in opposite circles, always returning, always meeting at the center. And yet, if entropy is the mirror, if time itself has two faces, then what lies beyond the reflection? What world awaits past the glass we cannot cross? Just as rocks hold the memory of ancient seas, pressed into the weight of limestone and shale, the cosmos too may hold a record, a kind of memory not etched in shells or bones, but in the faint residues of past realities, a ripple of radiation, a subtle imbalance of particles, a scar in the geometry of space itself. These might be the fossils of forgotten universes. When we hold a fossil in our hand, we are touching a life that no longer breathes, yet its pattern remains crystallized in stone. Could it be that the very fabric of the universe does the same, holding on to faint shadows of worlds that came before ours, realities that rose and collapsed long before the first dawn on Earth? Maybe the stars we see are not the first generation of stars at all, but only the latest chorus in an endless song, one where the verses are erased, yet still leave an echo in the silence between the notes. Science already tells us that fossils form through a patient trade, life exchanging its soft impermanence for the mineral's long endurance. Carbon gives way to stone, fragile bone becomes quartz, and time replaces breath with silence. In the same way, entire universes might leave behind what physicists sometimes call relics, the cosmic microwave background, the faint radiation still, whispering across space from the birth of our universe. It hums like the residue of an ancient fire, one that burned hotter and brighter than anything we can imagine, now cooled to a soft static. But what if there were more fires, older ones, each leaving their own invisible fossils layered one upon another, the way ocean beds hold countless layers of shells, each marking a vanished age? We wonder about deep time on Earth, the way continents drift, collide, and subduct into the mantle, erasing their own stories. Yet, what about cosmic deep time, scales so vast that even universes could subduct into each other, vanishing beneath layers of expansion and collapse, leaving only isotopic trails in the particles we now measure? Could the strange asymmetry of matter and antimatter be a fossil itself, a leftover clue from a universe that existed before this one? And if so, does that mean we are already walking upon the ruins of forgotten worlds, breathing air infused with the chemistry of histories that cannot be remembered? Philosophers often say that memory defines identity, that to forget is to dissolve. But what if the cosmos cannot fully forget? What if it remembers in secret, carrying echoes we cannot translate, like a dream we half recall upon waking? The silence between galaxies might not be empty at all, but saturated with archives too deep for our instruments, fossils of civilizations, or even physical laws that no longer exist. Perhaps entropy, that slow unraveling, is not only a measure of disorder, but a form of remembering through loss. Every decay, every collapse, every fading star might be the universe telling itself, over and over, that it once was, and that it will never be in quite the same way again. Could it be that black holes are not only endings, but also vaults, sealed chambers holding compressed records of everything that ever fell inside? Some suggest that the surface of a black hole, the event horizon, may encode information in strange holographic scripts. If so, are these cosmic tombs also cosmic libraries, containing the compressed fossils of galaxies, planets, and maybe even minds? And if they do, who or what could ever open them? Maybe no one. Maybe the fossils of forgotten universes are not meant to be read, only to exist, silent and unreachable, like seashells locked forever inside stone. When we gaze at the stars, we tend to imagine only beginnings, explosions of light, creation stories unfolding. But what if each spark is also a monument, a grave marker, a trace of something that once was and is no more. To lie beneath such a sky is to rest under a ceiling of memories we can never name, fossils of time itself scattered in the dark. And yet, if this much can be lost, if even entire universes might collapse into silence and still leave only whispers behind, what else might remain hidden, waiting in the quiet folds of existence, just beyond what we can see? The pale mathematics of possibility begins quietly, with numbers, with the slow rhythm of counting, as if the universe itself were reciting a lullaby we do not fully understand. A lullaby stitched not from sound, but from ratios and patterns, endlessly repeating, endlessly unfolding, until repetition itself becomes a kind of silence, a silence carved out of infinite possibility. We often imagine mathematics as something cold, sharp, mechanical, but here, in the vast, dark theater of existence, it becomes softer, almost alive, breathing beneath the surface of things like a hidden tide, carrying secrets that refuse to fade. Consider how geometry appears where no hand has drawn it, the spiral of a seashell echoing the arms of a galaxy, the branching veins of a leaf repeating in the river deltas that wind across the earth, the way frost etches its delicate lace against glass. On a winter morning, these shapes feel accidental, and yet they are not accidents, they are outcomes, inevitable structures that numbers lean toward as though drawn by some unseen gravity of form. Could it be that reality itself is nothing more than a long equation written across the canvas of time? An equation we cannot solve, but whose results we inhabit, like shadows cast by figures we cannot see. Physicists speak of higher dimensions, curled away, hidden from our senses, and yet alive in the mathematics of string theory, where particles are not points, but tiny, vibrating loops, their frequencies composing the very texture of matter. If this is true, then perhaps every stone, every drop of water, every breath we take is a kind of silent chord, resonating in a music so vast we cannot hear it, but only feel it as the weight of being alive. And if numbers truly are the script of creation, then might there be other scripts, other solutions, parallel universes, where the same equation was solved differently, where outcomes drift like pale reflections across a mirror we can never quite touch. Imagine a universe where the constants are only slightly altered, where the speed of light is a little faster, where gravity leans a little stronger, where stars burn blue for moments too brief to be remembered. In those universes, life as we know it may never arise, or it may take a form unrecognizable, perhaps built not on carbon, but on elements we cannot yet imagine, perhaps perceiving dimensions we cannot yet sense. These possibilities linger, not as science fiction, but as quiet consequences of mathematics, the inevitable branches of an infinite equation, the pale mathematics of possibility. And yet, the thought feels both comforting and strange. Comforting, because it suggests that nothing is singular, that we are never entirely alone, that somewhere, something has taken a different path. Strange, because it reminds us of our own fragility, our narrow balance, our improbable survival perched on the razor edge of physical law. Could it be that all of this oceans, mountains, cities, our memories, our dreams is simply one answer, one solution among countless others? And if so, then what does it mean to be here, now, listening to this, rather than somewhere else, somewhen else, in another unfolding. Maybe the numbers know. Maybe the spiral, the symmetry, the rhythm that returns again and again across scales is a whisper, a reminder that possibility is not empty, that every pattern is an echo of something larger, something unseen. And as we drift into that thought, as we let the pale mathematics wash over us like a tide, we begin to wonder if this much can be written into the fabric of reality by numbers alone. Then what other stories might still be waiting, quietly, in the dark beyond our sight? The air itself seems empty, and yet it is never truly empty. Even in the silence between worlds, in the darkness that folds over galaxies, there is movement, a quiet drifting of matter, too small to name. Dust, invisible, scattered like a forgotten language across the void. It does not announce itself. It does not shine. It does not call attention. And yet it is everywhere, whispering against the skin of atoms, brushing against the edges of what we think of as real. What if what we see is only the brightest part of existence, and what we do not see is the weight that steadies everything else? Perhaps the universe is not built only of stars and planets, but of the silent, patient veil of dust that passes unseen. When we hold a piece of stone in our hand, when we marvel at the patterns etched by time, we forget that there is something smaller, more elusive, sliding through. Particles that come not from here, but from distances too vast to measure, carrying signatures unlike anything native to Earth. They arrive with no sound, no light, and yet they leave traces that last longer than civilizations, longer than oceans, longer than mountains. Sometimes, in the delicate balances of isotope decay, in the faint divergences from expected half-lives, there are anomalists, persistent, impossible to explain fully. Could it be that something invisible, some dust of the unseen universe, is touching the atoms we measure, nudging their clocks, shifting their rhythms by the faintest fraction? Scientists track isotopes the way poets follow shadows, looking for patterns that betray a story. Carbon becomes nitrogen. Uranium dissolves into lead, each with its tempo, each with its promise of consistency. And yet, here and there, the numbers bend. They do not fail completely, but they lean, ever so slightly, toward something unknown. Is it the trembling of our instruments, or is it the trembling of reality itself? Dust, not the kind that gathers in our homes or clings to our shelves, but dust that moves between stars, dust that was born before Earth itself, dust that carries within it the hidden pulse of other universes. If such particles pass through us constantly, as physicists suggest, then every breath we take is already threaded with the invisible. Every cell in the body, every drop of blood, is crossed by visitors older than our solar system. We do not feel them, but maybe feeling was never the point. Maybe the truth of their presence is not in sensation, but in influence, the way a silent current can shape the bed of a river without ever being seen on the surface. Could this dust alter the pace of decay, the unfolding of matter? The very clocks we use to tell time in deep geology, when geologists split open rocks, when they read the isotopic signatures hidden inside, they are reading history as if it were etched in stone. They tell us the age of mountains, the rise and fall of seas, the shifting plates beneath continents. But if the invisible dust of the cosmos has been brushing against these atoms for billions of years, then what we read is not a perfect clock, but a dialogue between Earth and the unseen. The anomalies are not errors, they are conversations, tiny interruptions that remind us that our world is never fully closed, never isolated, never untouched. There is something humbling in the thought that our most precise sciences, our most delicate measures, may already be blurred by the faint hand of the unseen. We trust the regularity of decay because we need to believe in a stable rhythm, a constant by which to anchor the deep ages. And yet, what if stability is only an approximation? What if time itself, measured in the breath of atoms, carries the fingerprint of dust that drifts unseen? Not because the universe is chaotic, but because it is alive, layered, threaded with influences that stretch beyond our vision in the silence of night. When one thinks of the stars, it is tempting to imagine only the light, but perhaps it is the dark, the invisible, the drifting particles with no shine that are the true fabric of connection. They fall through us, through oceans, through mountains, through every forgotten fossil. And they will continue long after our names are gone. Maybe, maybe not. But the thought lingers as dust lingers, settling slowly in spaces we never notice. And if so much can be hidden in the smallest anomalies, if so much can be carried by what cannot be seen, then we must ask what other histories lie folded into the silence, waiting, brushed into the atoms of our world by dust from beyond. And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? The rocks beneath our feet are not silent, even if they appear to be. They carry the weight of every storm that passed before us, every eruption that spilled fire into the sky, every flood that swept life away and then left silence behind. In their layers, time is pressed thin, folded, and hidden, but still there, like pages in a book whose ink has faded yet never truly vanished. To touch stone is to brush against memory itself, though the stone does not speak in words. It speaks in patterns, in isotopes left behind by vanished atmospheres, in crystals aligned to the pull of vanished oceans, in fossils that linger like echoes of voices that can no longer be heard. The earth remembers itself, even when we do not. And yet, what if there were another earth, a twin turning silently in some mirror of creation, carrying its own archives of fire and flood? Would its rocks remember the same story, or would they recall another? If a mirror earth were to exist, perhaps it would be carved from the same dust, the same elements born in the collapse of ancient stars. Its oceans might crash against familiar coasts, its mountains might lift toward the same quiet sky, and its fossils might look like the ones we hold in our hands. But what if the story etched into its stone was reversed, the scars healing backward, the rivers flowing upstream into clouds instead of rain, the ruins of fallen civilizations rising into monuments once again, as if entropy had learned to undo itself? We might wonder whether such a place could truly exist, or if it lives only in the dream of symmetry. A thought experiment, whispered by the laws of physics that tell us time, might not be as one-directional as we imagine. Memory on our Earth is the story of decay, of unfolding, of dispersal. Things fall apart, heat scatters, bones turn to dust. But in a mirror world, might memory be the opposite, slow gathering, a return, a kind of homecoming in which every particle remembers where it once belonged and drifts back to it, A broken shell could pull its fragments inward and close again. A forest turned to ash could rearrange itself into trees. The ocean might lift its drowned creatures back into breath. We can almost feel the lull of that idea, the strange comfort of reversal, even though we know that on our side of the glass, time moves only forward. Still, the mind wanders to the strangeness of such a twin. Could there be fossils of the future, bones pressed into stone before the creature has even lived? Could glaciers carve valleys upward instead of down? Could light from our sun fall into the soil and climb back into the sky, carrying with it not heat but memory, erasing the evidence of all that was? If our world is the memory of what has been, perhaps the mirror is the memory of what might be, or what might have been had the arrow of time bent differently. Maybe, maybe not. What would it mean if somewhere beyond the reach of our telescopes, the mirror Earth was carrying us to, our lives played in reverse, every loss turning into reunion, every ruin becoming a beginning? Would we recognize ourselves in that reversed story, or would the reflection become so unfamiliar that it felt like a stranger? And if we could stand in that other world, would we long for the stillness of this one, where memory moves only in one direction, where forgetting is permanent, and where the silence of stone is all we have? The earth beneath us holds its memories, in silence, in strata, in fossils that crumble when touched too long. Its twin, if it exists, might hold them differently, not in silence, but in reversal, not in crumbling, but in restoration. And so we are left to wonder if this much can be remembered, if this much can be preserved in stone, what else waits beyond the mirror, carrying a memory that is not ours, but could have been? If another version of you exists, shaped by mirrored atoms, would they dream the same dreams? Or would their silence remind us that identity itself may be a fragile illusion? Perhaps in the long corridors of time, the question is not whether there is another self, but whether the self we hold so tightly even belongs to us at all. When we think of mirrors, we imagine a simple reflection, a reversal of left and right, a perfect image mimicking us in silence. But in the language of physics, a mirror is not only a surface of light, it is a possibility. A world where every spin is reversed, every molecular shape inverted, every tiny hand of matter turning in the opposite direction. And if such a world could exist, would the person staring back from that mirror be you, or a stranger who merely wears your face? Scientists once wondered whether the laws of nature themselves were ambidextrous. For a long time it was believed they were, that left and right made no difference, that the universe would accept both with equal grace. But in the middle of the 20th century, experiments revealed that certain particles do not behave the same in mirrored form. The weak nuclear force, which whispers in the heart of atoms, prefers one hand over the other. It violates symmetry. It chooses a side, and in that choosing, something deep and unsettling is revealed. Perhaps the universe itself has a preference, a bias, a handedness that cannot be undone. If so, then a mirrored version of you might never breathe in unison with you, never age in the same rhythm, never truly carry the same thoughts, and yet we cling to the sense of identity as if it were solid, as if the self could be charted like a coastline. But is it not more like sand slipping between our fingers? We say, "I am me," but what does that mean? when each cell in the body is replaced over time, when memories shift and erode, when even the atoms themselves may not be eternal but borrowed from old stars and returned to dust. If we are already changing with each breath, then how fragile is the claim that a mirrored self must remain tethered to us? In geology, we learn that rocks keep faint records of their past, orientation iron particles freezing in alignment with Earth's magnetic field, tiny compass needles written into stone. And yet, the field itself has reversed over and over, flipping north and south, as if even the planet's identity were uncertain, as if the world itself were sometimes mirrored against its own history. Fossils, too, tell stories of vanished forms, bodies pressed into rock as if the earth were remembering. But memory is never perfect. The fossils are fragments, partial echoes, missing the texture of skin, the colors of feathers, the sound of the creature's breath. What is left is only an outline, a suggestion of identity, and the rest is silence. Perhaps that is what we are, two fossils in progress. Our identity is an imprint left in the minds of others, a pattern in the chemistry of the brain, a ripple in the river of time. But those imprints are incomplete, never whole, never truly us. Maybe the mirror self would remind us of this incompleteness. Maybe they would look at us, not with malice, but with a quiet sorrow, as if to say, "You are not as fixed as you believe." And in dreams, the question deepens. What is it that dreams in us? Is it the body, with its networks of neurons firing in strange rhythms? Or is it something else, a quiet observer that slips beyond the laws of matter? If a mirrored self were to dream, would they wake with the same lingering images? Or would their dream dissolve into shapes we cannot follow? A geometry reversed, a narrative that feels familiar and foreign all at once. We like to think that identity is a flame that burns at the center of us, but maybe it is more like a reflection on water, trembling with every breeze, broken and reformed, never quite the same from one moment to the next. If another version of us waits behind the mirror, they may not be dreaming of us at all. They may simply be waiting in silence. A silence that tells us something we do not want to hear, that the self is less a truth and more a question. And if that is so, if even identity can slip through our hands like shadow, then what else have we mistaken for solid ground? What other certainties might dissolve when held up to the mirror of time? Asterisk. Just as rivers erode mountains, the passage of ages erodes cosmic balance, and if we listen closely, we can almost hear the slow hush of it, as though the fabric of reality itself is being thinned grain by grain, moment by moment, in a process so vast we cannot witness it directly, only imagine its endless retreat. The rocks of earth remind us of this patience, carved down from peaks into valleys, from valleys into dust, their memory carried away in rivers that do not end but fold into oceans. And yet, what if the same law extends beyond stone and water, reaching into the invisible scaffolding of the cosmos itself, where the symmetry that once defined its birth now begins to fracture in silence? We think of symmetry as perfect, as eternal, but maybe it is only a fleeting condition, a kind of fragile balance, the way morning frost coats a window pane before the sun melts it away, leaving only the faint trace of what was once crystalline and whole. Perhaps the laws of physics that we take as unshakable truths are themselves weathered, slowly softened by the ceaseless current of time. Not in a single collapse, but in a quiet fraying, a subtle erosion that pulls at the edges until patterns that once mirrored each other perfectly drift apart. Could it be that universes, like mountains, age into asymmetry? That what was once flawless and balanced eventually begins to lean, to tilt, to crumble? The particles that make us, the protons, the neutrons, the electrons, circling their faint orbits, follow laws of order. But already within their story there is imperfection, tiny violations of symmetry recorded in the way matter outweighed antimatter, tipping the scale just enough for stars to burn, for planets to form, for us to exist. If balance was broken once, might it be broken again and again, each fracture leading to a universe less stable, less complete, until all that remains are scattered fragments adrift in a sea we cannot chart. In geology, we can touch erosion, trace it with our fingers across the face of a canyon wall, but in cosmology, erosion is slower, deeper, nearly impossible to see. And yet the evidence may already be present in the faint imbalance of cosmic background radiation, or in the strange decay of particles that seem unwilling to live forever. Is it possible that entropy itself is not only the dissolution of energy, but the dissolution of symmetry, the washing away of balance, the collapse of harmony into discord? And if so, then perhaps symmetry is not an eternal truth, but only a temporary guest, a visitor, lingering for a time before dissolving into something more chaotic, something less recognizable. We live in the wake of this loss without realizing it, in a universe whose perfection is already chipped, whose geometry is already warped, whose mirrors no longer align. Maybe the constellations we look at each night are only the surface of a deeper asymmetry, like cracks in ice that reveal the shifting water beneath. What if universes too can weather away, not in explosions or violent endings, but in the same slow attrition that turns mountains to sand, seas to salt, memories to silence? A proton, given enough time, may dissolve, releasing the faintest whisper of energy, as though even the most solid things in creation cannot resist the tide of erosion. And if every proton falls, one by one, over unimaginable spans, then the very matter that builds galaxies, stars, and ourselves will fade into a dust finer than dust, a silence deeper than silence. But what happens to symmetry when it decays? Does it vanish completely, or does it scatter, slipping sideways into reflections, into neighboring dimensions that carry the echoes of what was lost here? Could the patterns of order we once held be preserved elsewhere, like fossils pressed into another reality, where they are studied by other eyes that wonder why their own balance seems so incomplete? If universes are neighbors, what prevents the erosion of one from spilling into another? The imbalance of one world leaking into the fabric of the next? Perhaps there is no clean separation, only a porous border through which symmetry bleeds, fragment by fragment, until every reflection carries a trace of its neighbor's decay. Maybe this is why we sense déjà vu, or why dreams seem stitched from threads that do not belong to us, because our minds, like mirrors, are already sharing in this erosion of order, touched by fragments that drift from places we cannot see. And in this thought there lingers an unsettling calm, that balance is never truly permanent, that everything, mountains, rivers, galaxies, laws themselves, are caught in the same long tide of loss. Not because nature is cruel, not because time is violent, but because even perfection, like stone, is mortal. And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? The light of ancient stars still travels toward us, a soft inheritance from fires that burned before we were born. Photons, tiny packets of memory, move endlessly through space, carrying the story of hydrogen turned to helium, of gravity pressing matter until it glowed. Each particle is a fossil, not of stone or bone, but of light itself, a relic older than any world we know. When our eyes lift to the night sky, we are not just looking outward, we are looking backward, into a past that has never stopped arriving. It is a fossil record, written not in rock but in radiance, and yet light is only half the story. For, if there are fossils made of light, there must also be fossils made of dark, of silence, of things that passed through the universe without ever leaving a shine behind. Darkness, too, has a memory, though it resists our gaze. Perhaps it clings to the folds of cosmic voids, perhaps it drifts in the great tidal rivers of galaxies, invisible but sculpting the shape of everything else. Could it be that what we call dark matter is not a thing at all, but a residue, a fossil shadow from processes we do not yet understand? Maybe the universe is filled with echoes of vanished states of being, their imprints woven into the structure of gravity and time itself. Light is generous. With its history it arrives, it strikes, it tells us where it came from. But darkness hides its lineage. It offers no straightforward evidence, no direct signature. We only know it is there because galaxies spin faster than they should, because clusters of stars hold together as if clasped by an invisible hand. What if this hand is fossil, dark, and ancient, accumulated record of lost phenomena, layered invisibly, guiding us without ever speaking? We search for it through mathematics, through equations that balance forces we cannot see. We imagine particles, ghostly and elusive, streaming through us even now. But what if the fossils of the dark are not particles at all? What if they are scars in space-time, faint bruises of forgotten collisions, whispers of symmetries that broke before light itself was born? If so, then every orbit, every curve of a galaxy is a kind of silent testimony, a language we have not yet learned to read. In this sense, fossil light and fossil dark form a dialogue, the seen and the unseen, the said and the unsaid. Light gives us images, measurements, stories. Dark offers only questions, and questions are fossils too, reminders of all we have not yet understood. Imagine a universe where memory is not kept in brightness, but in the absences, in the quiet intervals between photons, in the gaps where nothing was recorded. Could it be that the universe remembers more in silence than it ever does in sound, more in shadow than in flame? We are creatures drawn to light, but perhaps we misunderstand what the dark is telling us. Perhaps every dark halo around a galaxy is not simply invisible matter, but the fossilized remainder of unlit history's entropies that stretched too far, energies that collapsed too soon, possibilities that never ignited into radiance. If fossil light is the story of what shone, fossil dark may be the story of what failed to shine, what vanished without ever blooming. And maybe this balance between shining and not shining is what gives the cosmos its shape. After all, what we see is never the whole. The stars we admire are only the surface of a deeper ocean. The darkness between them is not empty, but thick with presence, with unlit archives. Maybe the fossils of the dark are guiding us still, unseen, as surely as the fossils of light reach our eyes. And yet, if we have misread the silence, if fossil dark means something stranger than matter, then what else might the universe be keeping from us, hidden in the folds of its night? The dream of lost civilizations in the mirror drifts like a question we cannot fully wake from, a possibility that hovers on the edge of science and myth, yet does not leave us alone. For what is a mirror, if not a silent invitation to imagine? Another world beyond the surface, a place that looks so similar, yet is forever untouchable. And what if the earth itself carried such mirrors, not made of glass, but of physics, of hidden symmetries and reversals that run beneath the skin of reality? A mirrored earth, born not of fantasy, but of mathematics, where particles spin opposite, where light bends the other way, where time feels ever so slightly reversed. Could life take root there, as it did here, tracing a parallel course through the long corridors of geology and history? And if it did, would its civilizations bloom unseen beside our own, like flowers pressing against opposite sides of a window, so close and yet never touching? We search for ruins in deserts, for shards of pottery in sand, for carvings in stone, that whisper of cultures lost to time. But what if the truest ruins are not here at all, not beneath our feet, but folded alongside us? Unreachable, layered like pages in a book we can only read from one side. Could there be technofosselsicos of tools, machines, structures that are not ours but theirs, faint ripples of another intelligence bleeding across the seam of worlds? Some physicists speak of mirror matter, a shadow version of the particles we know undetectable except by the smallest gravitational nudge. Could it be that the missing mass of the cosmos, the invisible weight we call dark matter, is in fact the silent architecture of mirror civilizations, their cities and monuments woven into the void? Maybe what we mistake for absence is not absence at all, but presence turned away from us, a history written backwards. When we look into water at night, we see not only our face, but another sky, stars quivering in the dark reflection, doubled and unstable. In that moment, we realize how fragile the boundary is between here and there, how easily vision can deceive, how easily we can believe in two skies, two moons, two worlds. And so perhaps we stand forever between reflections, blind to what presses against us from the other side. Could their rivers run beneath ours, flowing in silence, their mountains rising where ours sink into seas, their fossils layered beneath our fossils, a record of life that left no trace on this earth, but left its weight in the invisible? And if their civilizations rose, would they wonder about us as we wonder about them, sensing faint echoes in the silence, perhaps dreaming too of another people, unreachable, whose ruins overlap with theirs in forgotten silence? There is a sorrow in this thought, but also a tenderness, for it suggests that loss is never final, that the stories erased here may still be unfolding elsewhere, that what time devours in one world, it may preserve in another. Entropy eats at stone, at bone, at memory, yet perhaps not everywhere at once. Perhaps the erasures we grieve are not total, but only shifts, like words carried into another draft of the universe. What if Atlantis exists, not beneath our seas, but beneath their seas, a city whose towers are whole, whose walls have not fallen, whose fires still burn? What if the civilizations that crumble here continue there, forever unwitnessed? Maybe we are not alone in loss, but mirrored in it, joined by a silence that stretches deeper than any ocean trench. And yet, we ask ourselves, how would we ever know? The isotopes we measure, the fossils we unearth, the layers of carbon and dust that tell us the story of Earth, all of it belongs to this side, this version, this Earth. But if time itself can ripple, if reality itself can fold, then perhaps memory is wider than we think. Perhaps déjà vu is not just the brain misfiring, but the faint recognition of a life lived elsewhere, faint technofossils of consciousness echoing through the divide. Perhaps when we dream of places we have never been, of people we have never met, it is because some part of us is listening to the ruins of the mirror, pressed faintly against our own. We may never touch them, never walk their streets, never hear their voices, and yet the dream persists, patient, insistent, weaving itself into myth, into science, into the quiet hours of the night when the mind drifts toward wonder. For what else might be waiting behind the glass of reality, hidden in the symmetry of things? What else might be lost to us, and yet not lost at all, just turned away, folded out of reach? And if this much can be imagined, then perhaps it is only the beginning of what remains unseen. The thought drifts in quietly, as if it has always been waiting at the edges of our imagination. What would a mirror star look like? Not the golden suns we know, not the steady warmth that slips through the leaves at dawn, but something quieter, stranger, a presence that burns without revealing itself. We can almost picture it, light folding in on itself, pouring inward instead of spilling outward, a pale fire that hides in symmetry. The sky above us would look unchanged, and yet, behind the veil, an opposite flame would live, invisible to our eyes, untouched by our instruments, unreachable in its perfection. We wonder if physics allows such a thing. We think of antimatter, of hidden sectors, of the ghost-like neutrinos that pass through the entire Earth, as if nothing solid were ever in their way. Could there be suns like this, built not of hydrogen and helium, but of something that reflects our own reality, like a shadow in a forgotten mirror? If our sun has burned for billions of years, feeding life, melting ice, shaping climate and memory, then perhaps its twin, its inverse, burns just as long, but with a silence we cannot detect, not because it is weak, but because its brilliance curves away from us, trapped inside its own geometry, in deep time, long before the continents we stand on had settled into their present shape. The Earth itself has carried secrets like this. The rocks remember strange isotopes, fingerprints of ancient radiation. Fossils remember creatures that vanished long before our minds learned to wonder. And the universe, too, must remember, even if its memory is written in particles we cannot yet decipher. A mirror star could exist just beyond the edge of knowing, a companion sun whose presence is felt only as absence, only as a question we can never quite resolve. Maybe the faint whispers of symmetry that physicists speak of, the balance between matter and antimatter, the delicate equations of conservation, are echoes of that pale fire. We look up at the stars and sea-blazing surfaces, yet every one of them is also a story of gravity, of fusion, of entropy, wearing down structure until nothing remains but ash and silence. If there were stars that burned without light, they would not escape that destiny either. They too would exhaust themselves, collapse, scatter their invisible remnants across the cold. The universe does not play favorites, it allows everything to rise and then to fall, whether visible or unseen, and still we are drawn to the thought, perhaps because it is comforting, perhaps because it reminds us that not all truth is obvious, not all reality is bright. Maybe the most powerful fires are the ones that never reach our eyes, the ones that flicker only in imagination. Could it be that the fabric of existence is woven of both the radiant and the concealed, the revealed and the hidden, so that the very balance of being requires some suns to burn unseen? If such a mirror star hovered near us, what would change? Would we feel it as warmth in our bones, or as a stillness that settled deeper than sleep? Would our tides rise differently, our climate drift toward another rhythm, our memory reshape itself in ways we could not explain? Maybe we already live under the influence of a pale sun we cannot find, its geometry folding light inward, its gravity bending silence around us. Maybe our own lives, our own thoughts, are touched by invisible symmetry fires. Then perhaps there are symmetric histories too, civilizations that bloomed and withered without leaving a trace, cultures erased not by violence but by the quiet turning of time. Just as a star may shine without shining, a story may exist without being told. Waiting in the deep shadows of memory, we close our eyes and sense it, a pale fire, unspoken yet alive, hovering in the quiet spaces between galaxies. Not a star we can point to, not a flame that will warm our skin, but a hidden twin, a mirror we cannot see, and yet it lingers softly like an unfinished sentence. Because if such symmetry exists in the heavens, then what else might the universe be hiding just beyond the edge of our vision, waiting for us to imagine it? The earth is not steady, never has been, and never will be. It moves through cycles of heat and chill, through long epochs of burning deserts and endless ice, through stretches of lush green warmth and sudden collapse into frost. These rhythms are not simply background events in the story of life, they are the stage itself, the unseen clock that ticks beneath every heartbeat and every fossil pressed into stone. And yet, when we look at this record, carved into layers of mud and rock, it is as if we are only glimpsing half of a greater truth, as though another world is hidden, running parallel, unseen but strangely symmetrical. Imagine, if you will, a mirror Earth, not a place of alien skies or impossible colors, but a planet that moves to the opposite rhythm of our own. When our world is locked in ice, theirs is warm, rivers flowing, forests stretching across continents. When our world blooms with subtropical seas, theirs is frozen, glaciers grinding across the land, sealing oceans under sheets of silence. And the living beings of that mirror world, whatever they are, rise and fall, not with us, but against us, their extinctions arriving in reverse, their prospering arriving in our decline. Could such a symmetry exist, not in the physical sense, but in the hidden mathematics of climate, in the possible branches of reality that geology whispers about when we study deep time? On Earth, We know that ice ages come and go in slow pulses, drawn by shifts in orbit and tilt by the way sunlight strikes the planet. We know that volcanic fire can change the atmosphere, and that carbon trapped, released, buried, reborn can tip the balance between freezing silence and roaring green. Fossils tell us of creatures thriving in one age, swept away in the next, replaced by forms adapted to the new air, the new sea. But in this mirror vision, the question is not what was lost, but what was gained elsewhere at the very same moment. When our mammoths trudged across snow, were they mirrored by tropical giants on a twin Earth of warmth? When dinosaurs vanished here, did they still roam somewhere else, not in space, but in time's opposing wave? It is not a scientific model we hold in our hands. It is a speculation, a soft dream rising from the data, a wonder born of pattern. Yet even within geology, there is a mirror-like quality to how catastrophe and renewal play against one another. Each great extinction, it seems, clears a stage so that another cast of life can enter. Not because life is strong, but because Earth itself is restless, never content to hold a single climate, never willing to preserve a single balance. Perhaps that is the true mirror, the way disaster always reflects creation, the way loss always shadows the possibility of new forms. Still, the thought lingers. What if these cycles are not merely our own, but are echoed somewhere, somehow, in realities that turn back against ours? What if every warming we endure is a freezing elsewhere? Every collapse of species here, a flowering of species there. Could it be that even in the silence of extinction, there is a hidden counterpart, a thriving that we cannot see? Or is this only the echo of our longing, the human need to believe that loss is never absolute, that destruction never arrives without its twin? We can trace the isotopes of ancient ice, reading the chemistry of oxygen locked away for hundreds of thousands of years. We can measure the carbon of ancient soils, the fossils of pollen grains that mark vanished forests. We can map the shorelines of seas that rose and fell like breath across continents. All of this tells us that our world has been both furnace and freezer, paradise and wasteland, often within spans far shorter than eternity. And yet the mirror remains invisible, a shadow, thought, a speculation. We cannot test it, we cannot weigh it, but in the stillness of night, when time feels thin, we cannot help but wonder. Maybe the mirror world is not a place at all, but a metaphor hidden in Earth's own cycles. Maybe every time the planet flips, from ice to fire, from fire to ice, it is reflecting itself, showing us that change is never linear, but always folded, always doubled. Maybe the true mirror is within Ustaway. We adapt, the way we collapse, the way we rise again. For we too are creatures of climate, and our history is written in droughts, in floods, in the sudden silence after famine. To look at Earth's mirror is to look at ourselves, and to realize that every comfort we know rests on fragile balance, on air that can thicken or thin, on oceans that can warm or freeze. And yet, if the mirror can show us both survival and extinction, both abundance and void, what else might it reveal about the future waiting in silence just beyond our sight? Every extinction on Earth wipes away stories. What if those lost species still walk in the mirror world, their echoes alive where ours vanished? Perhaps somewhere in the folds of time we cannot touch, there exists a place where the mammoth still roams beneath auroras, where the great marine reptiles still cut through ancient seas, and the forests are heavy with the weight of wings that never knew silence. Here, we are left only with bones, impressions in stone, chemical traces written into the sedimentary layers like fragile handwriting. But there, in the imagined other place, their footsteps still press into damp earth, their cries still ripple through twilight air. Extinction is not just the end of a creature, it is the unraveling of a memory. Each species holds a way of moving, a sound, a rhythm of breath, a relationship with the land that no other can replicate. When they vanish, it is not only bodies we lose, but entire grammars of being. And so we wander through our own world, surrounded by gaps we cannot name, shadows shaped like questions. Is it possible that nature remembers what we cannot? That in some mirrored echo of reality, the world plays on, unbroken, untouched by the scythe of time? Science tells us extinction is absolute. Once the last individual dies, the genetic thread is severed, the music silenced. And yet, even science admits that nothing ever truly disappears. Atoms are shuffled, molecules recycled, isotopes drawn down into the churn of ocean subduction, and slowly lifted back through the breathing of volcanoes. The very air we breathe carries traces of lungs long gone. In that sense, the mammoth is not lost at all, only rearranged. Its body is in the rivers, its carbon folded into trees, its breath dissolved into sky. Perhaps the mirror world is not elsewhere, but here, scattered through us, invisible, waiting to be noticed. The fossil record is a whisper, a partial sentence in a language without vowels. We lean close, trying to hear, but the words slip away. A feather preserved in amber does not sing, yet it hints at the wing that beat against storms, at the air displaced by motion, at the weight of a life that once leaned against gravity. And every fossil is like this, not a body, but a suggestion. What if, in some other layer of existence, these stories never ended, but continued to unfold, their pages still being written while ours were burned? Imagine a mirror Earth, not separate in space, but tilted in time, a place where the asteroid never struck, where forests of cycads still sway, and ammonites still bloom in spirals beneath waves, untouched by human eyes. Imagine walking there, surrounded not by ghosts, but by the living, the untouched, the never forgotten. Would we recognize them as real, or would we think them dreams given shape? Perhaps both. Perhaps we already visit this world in sleep, when the brain drifts into patterns older than memory, when the walls between what was and what might have been grow thin. But extinction is silence, and silence is strange. It is not the presence of nothing, but the absence of sound once made. A quiet meadow today was once a chorus of insects that no longer exist. A forest once carried birdsong, now gone forever. Silence is not empty, but filled with reminders of what is missing. Could it be that the mirror world is the echo of that silence, a dimension where nothing is ever truly lost, only delayed, only waiting? Maybe, maybe not. We stand at the edge of our own epoch, the Anthropocene, knowing we are accelerating losses faster than geology has ever recorded. Species vanish before we even name them, entire lineages disappearing like pages torn from a book we barely began to read. What if, in the mirror world, Those pages are kept safe, their ink unbroken, their stories whole. And what does it mean that we will never hold them again in this place, on this earth? The thought lingers like a tide pulling outward to worlds. One of silence and one of continuation. Two timelines, one of absence and one of presence. Which is more real, the one we touch or the one we dream? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? The question of perception is one of silence and shadow, a reminder that what we see is not necessarily all that is. Every living creature moves within its own field of awareness, and that awareness is not infinite but bounded, a circle drawn by evolution, survival, and the fragile chemistry of the senses. A bird follows magnetic lines across continents, feeling the pulse of the earth in ways we cannot. A whale hears songs that carry across entire oceans, while to us those vibrations dissolve into inaudible absence. What we call reality is a narrow sliver, a window cut into a much wider night, and perhaps just beyond the edges of our perception, something else waits, unseen, unnamed. Do we fail to notice a mirror universe, not because it is distant, but because our minds were never carved to recognize it? The human brain is not a pure lens. It is a sculptor, chiseling away what it deems unnecessary, filtering, discarding, reducing the infinite into something survivable. We call it the visible spectrum, but it is not the full story. Beyond red lies infrared, beyond violet lies ultraviolet, and still farther, gamma rays, cosmic waves, hidden bands of energy that flood the universe in rivers of light we will never see with our eyes. Yet they are there, humming in silence. Is it not possible that whole realities could flow beside us in this same way, present, constant, but filtered into nothingness by the sieve of perception? It is not the fault of the universe that we cannot see it all. It is not the fault of the stars or the hidden seas of matter that slip through our fingers like ghosts. It is simply that perception is not shaped for truth. It is shaped for survival. Our ancestors needed to hear the crack of a twig, the rush of water, the cry of a predator in the tall grass. They did not need to hear the music of hydrogen atoms, or the low hum of background radiation that still echoes from the birth of time. So the mind became blind by design, blind in ways we no longer notice, blind to entire realms that may lie beneath our fingertips. And perhaps, when we speak of a mirror universe, what we really mean is not a place that exists somewhere else, but a place that exists right here, interwoven, flowing parallel, invisible only because our senses have drawn the curtain too tightly. What if reality is layered like translucent sheets of glass, each pane carrying its own landscapes, its own histories, its own unfolding, and we walk across one surface while never feeling the weight of the others pressing close? Could it be that our science glimpses these other layers when equations predict matter that never quite appears, when particles flicker and vanish as though borrowed from another ledger? Could it be that déjà vu, dreams, and strange intuitions are the faintest ripple of another layer brushing ours? We often think of perception as a gift, but it is also a prison. The brain's work is not to reveal, but to reduce, not to expand, but to simplify. In deep time, this narrowing has cost us more than we can measure. Entire epochs of history pass unrecorded because there was no eye to see them, no memory to keep them. Fossils dissolve, sediments are swallowed into the Earth's mantle, isotopes decay into silence, and all that remains is the suggestion of a story never fully told. Could it be that even now, our failure to perceive is writing loss into the record of the universe? That there are oceans of reality vanishing around us simply because we do not know how to notice? And if perception is indeed the veil, then what lies on the other side may not be far at all. It may not be separated by distance, or even by time, but only by the softness of awareness, by the fact that we are tuned too narrowly to recognize what hums so close. And yet, if this veil is so easily drawn, if perception itself can erase whole worlds, then we must ask, what else has been hidden, waiting just beyond the fragile circle of our sight? The pale boundary of isotopes. There are patterns in matter so small we rarely think about them, yet they are the threads holding every second of existence together. At the heart of atoms, in the quiet chambers where protons and neutrons reside, time itself has a kind of clock ticking in the way isotopes decay. It is a rhythm so steady, so dependable, that we use it to measure the ages of rocks, the bones of vanished animals, the fossils of plants that once bent in winds no human ever felt. And yet, hidden inside this certainty, some physicists have noticed something odd, like the faintest shiver in the fabric. In long experiments, left running through endless nights, tiny discrepancies have appeared. A half-life that does not quite add up, a particle that moves a fraction faster or slower than the equation would suggest. It is tempting to dismiss such tremors as noise, as the ordinary static of the universe speaking in its own incomprehensible accent. But the human mind is restless, and when we notice irregularity in what should be perfect, a question grows. What if the laws we think are immutable are not laws at all, but agreements, fragile pacts written across invisible boundaries? Could it be that isotopes sometimes flicker, not because of something inside them, but because of something beyond them? The decay of an isotope is like a whisper from the deep past. Uranium breaking down into lead tells us of continents rising and eroding. Carbon dissolving back into nitrogen tells us how long a tree stood alive, how long a person once breathed. These are stories traced by the ratios of atoms, stories of time turned into substance. And so when those ratios falter, when the decay appears to stutter or misbehave, it feels almost as if time itself hesitated, paused mid-breath. What if those pauses are the faint signatures of places where universes brush against one another? Not collisions, not loud or violent, but delicate, like the edges of two soap bubbles pressing and reshaping each other's skins. We cannot see those other universes, if they exist, but maybe the isotopes can. Maybe in the heart of an atom, where we imagine nothing but silence, there are doors so thin we cannot touch them, but particles can. A stray neutrino slipping in from somewhere that is not here. A burst of energy arriving without explanation, then vanishing again. It would make sense, in a way, for the smallest things to notice first. The smallest things always carry the largest mysteries. Scientists sometimes describe decay as random. Nothing determines when a single atom will change, only the great statistics of many atoms together. But what if it isn't randomness? What if those changes obey rules too vast, too hidden for us to perceive? A code that links not just one world, but many. If so, every crack in the data, every discrepancy, may be less an error and more a message, written in a language we have not yet learned to read. It is humbling to imagine that the bedrock of science, the steady ticking of isotopes, might not be steady at all, but porous, soft, capable of bending. And if it can bend, what does that mean for our measurements of time? If decay is not a closed system, then even the ages we assign to fossils, even the clocks we set by the stars, might be only approximations, local guesses made inside one bubble of reality. Beyond it, the same bone, the same rock, the same dust of a dying star might hold a different story, a different number, a different age. Perhaps this is why our universe feels both orderly and haunted, both precise and dreamlike. Because, on the level of isotopes, we are listening not only to our own history, but to echoes of others. Maybe what we call anomalies are simply moments when the wall between worlds grows thin, and we catch the faintest resonance of another time flowing beside our own. And still, there is another possibility, that nothing lies beyond, and the cracks are merely the noise of our machines, the imperfections of human perception, trying to grasp perfection where none exists. Maybe, maybe not. The not knowing is itself a kind of space, vast and weightless, a silence that reminds us how much remains beyond our grasp. And so, when we study isotopes, we are not only measuring time, we are brushing against its edges. Not because decay alone tells us how long ago a stone cooled or a creature walked, but because it teases us with the idea that time itself may be broader, stranger, less obedient than we dare imagine. The pale boundary of isotopes is not just a scientific frontier, it is an invitation to wonder, to lean closer to the veil and ask quietly if something on the other side is listening back. And yet, if isotopes can flicker, if even the most reliable rhythms of matter can falter, then perhaps all clocks are softer than we believe. And if that much can shift, what else might be trembling just out of sight? Silence as a language has always been here, though we seldom recognize it. Not the emptiness we associate with quiet rooms, or the muting of voices when conversation ceases, but something older, deeper, like the slow breathing of the cosmos itself. In the mirror universe, the one that waits in the folds of possibility, silence may not be an absence at all. It may be the pulse of something vast that refuses to be contained in words. Every pause we hear between sounds is not simply blank, but a bridge, a thread of meaning stretched thin, shimmering in ways we have yet to understand. What if silence is the only universal grammar, the language spoken by galaxies as they drift apart, by atoms as they settle into stillness after collisions? What if silence is not nothing, but everything unspoken, everything too large to compress into sound? When we stand on the edge of a desert, the air still and endless, silence is not mute, it vibrates. It tells us of sand that once was mountain, of winds that have blown for thousands of years, carving stories into stone. The rocks listen, the dunes listen, and if we stay long enough, we begin to realize that silence is not the absence of history, is the archive of time. In the ocean's trench, where light never travels, silence is not empty either. it hums. With the weight of water pressing from above, with the slow shift of tectonic plates grinding countenance toward one another, their movements inaudible to us, yet resonant in the deep. This silence is alive. Even the fossils, the bones left behind by ancient creatures, speak through silence. They say, "We were here, and now we are not, and in our stillness we teach you about the flow of life." Their silence is a testimony more eloquent than the voices of living creatures, because it cannot be altered, cannot be hurried. It simply is. And perhaps this is what silence as a language means, that what we do not hear is not a void, but a signal, waiting for perception to widen. Consider the universe's background radiation, the faint glow left from the birth of everything. To us, it is nearly silence, a whisper at the edge of detection. Yet in that near silence lies the story of the cosmos becoming itself. Could it be that silence is the preferred state of reality, with sound only a ripple, a brief variation, like wind on still water? Maybe silence is what remains when all turbulence ends. The constant beneath the noise of stars burning, humans speaking, rivers falling. Silence has a rhythm too. The pause between a heartbeat and the next. The gap in conversation when two people share an unspoken understanding. The hush after a storm when the world feels new. These are not accidents, but reminders that silence carries weight. It does not need words to declare its presence. It does not demand attention. It simply holds us, asks us to notice what is already there. And when we allow ourselves to listen, truly listen, silence folds around us like a language without grammar, yet filled with meaning. Maybe the mirror universe does not speak in sounds at all. Maybe it waits for us in silence, echoing not through vibrations of air, but through the subtle shift of awareness, through the expansion of perception. Perhaps silence is the truest mirror, reflecting not what we say, but what we cannot say, not what we create in sound, but what lingers when sound dissolves. And yet, if silence itself is a language, then every pause, every stillness, every breath held in the dark becomes a message we are only beginning to decipher. And if this is so, then what other messages might be hidden, quietly woven into the spaces we have always mistaken for nothing? It is said that every mirror is more than glass, more than silver, more than the flicker of light it returns. It is a passage, a delicate threshold between what is seen and what remains unseen. Psychology has long carried its own mirrors, not in polished surfaces, but in the quiet corridors of the mind. When Carl Jung spoke of shadows, he was not speaking only of darkness, but of hidden selves, fragments of us folded inward, pressed against the walls of our unconscious. He wondered, if the shadow was not an enemy to be feared, but a companion we have simply not yet dared to meet, a reflection waiting patiently in silence. And what if this shadow is not only psychological, but cosmological, an echo of another world, drifting just beneath the skin of our awareness? The unconscious can feel like a second ocean running beneath the one we live in, vast, cold, mysterious, full of strange life that stirs and flickers just beyond our sight. Scientists map the ocean floor with sonar, sending pulses of sound into the depths and listening to the echoes that return. And perhaps our dreams are not so different. Each dream, each fleeting image, might be a pulse, a reverberation, bouncing off-submerged terrain inside us. Jung believed symbols arise from these depths, timeless and archetypal, woven from the same fabric as myths and religions, stories older than civilization. Could these symbols be the faint resonance of another world, not external but internal, whispering to us in metaphors that feel strangely familiar? Consider how the brain itself is carved by deep time. The human cortex is a relatively young arrival, but beneath it lies older structures, limbic, reptilian fossils of earlier minds. They do not vanish. They layer upon one another like sedimentary rock, and in these layers we find both memory and shadow, the heartbeat that quickens at a sound in the dark, the unease we cannot explain, the fleeting image that refuses to let go. These may be fossils of fear, still echoing, still alive. What if our unconscious is not only personal but geologic, storing remnants of eras when survival required other instincts, other visions, other selves? There are moments when time bends inward, when you sense that the self you are now is only one of many selves you have been, like rings within a tree. The child who looked out with wonder, the adolescent filled with restless fire, the one who loved and lost, the one who feared and fought, all still present, all still watching from within. They do not disappear. They sink deeper, refracted through layers of memory. Perhaps this is what the mirror of psychology reveals, that the unconscious is a kind of archive, a sedimented record of all our forgotten selves. And yet, just as oceans recycle the crust of the earth, pulling rock down into trenches and releasing it again in volcanic fire, maybe our unconscious does the same. What we bury returns, not unchanged, but molten, transformed, and so, the shadow. We imagine it as darkness, but in truth it is everything we have disowned, every impulse denied, every grief swallowed, every anger silenced. They do not vanish. They remain as isotopes within us, invisible but measurable, quietly shaping the chemistry of our being. To confront the shadow is not to banish it, but to listen, to notice its fingerprints in the patterns of our lives, the repetitions of mistakes, the echoes of fears we cannot name, to see in its reflection a mirror not of punishment, but of possibility, because what is hidden is not necessarily hostile. Sometimes it waits only to be integrated, to be welcomed back into the light. Is it possible that this mirror within us is not separate from the mirrors we find in nature? The way rivers reflect the sky, the way crystals echo the symmetry of snowflakes, the way galaxies spiral like seashells, patterns repeating across scales, across worlds. Maybe the unconscious too is a reflection, not merely of our own mind, but of something vaster, something cosmic. When we dream of falling, are we remembering gravity? When we dream of fire, are we recalling the ancient stars that seeded the carbon in our bodies? Perhaps our hidden selves are not just personal archives, but cosmic residues, reminders of a universe that shaped us before we were born. And still, a question lingers. When you look into a mirror, you see yourself reversed, left where right should be, right where left should be. What if the unconscious is also reversed? Not a mirror of who we are, but who we might be. Not the history of the self, but the possibility of another self altogether. Could it be that what we call the shadow is not only the past suppressed, but the future unrealized? that within the mirror of the unconscious lies not only what we fear, but what we long for, not only the darkness, but also the light we have not yet dared to live. We drift here, between psychology and geology, between symbol and sediment, between what we know and what remains unspoken. The shadow watches, the mirror waits. And as we listen to these echoes within, we might begin to wonder if such vast worlds exist inside us, layered, hidden, and half forgotten. Then how many other mirrors might we still carry, unseen, unopened, waiting for us to look more deeply? And yet, if the mind itself can hold an ocean, what else might the universe be hiding behind its own silent reflections? We wonder what happens when we die. Perhaps the ending here is the beginning there, the breath out mirrored as breath in, across a universe of silence. To think of death is to think of stillness, of matter coming to rest, yet nothing in the natural world ever truly rests. The stones beneath our feet, though unmoving to our eyes, are in slow migration across the deep mantle, broken down, lifted up, swallowed again. The body, too, is not immune to this law. It does not vanish. It surrenders itself. Skin becomes soil, breath becomes vapor, bones dissolve into chalk, and in time even chalk itself is pulled down into the sea, where it may be melted into something new. In this way, death is not a door that closes, but a mirror that reflects. Another form of becoming. And yet the mirror is pale, because it shows us not only the transformation, but also the erasure. We know of species that lived and breathed as vividly as we do now, yet their names are lost, their voices swallowed. What lingers are faint mineral signatures, isotope trails that whisper of once living blood, once moving rivers of thought, now reduced to numbers in a laboratory's quiet glow. The mirror of death does not show us a portrait, but only the faint outline where a portrait once hung. It reminds us of all that cannot be held, no matter how hard memory tries. A civilization may rise, carve stone, write words, build monuments, and still, the mirror strips it bare until only fragments remain. Is this what awaits us too? To be known not for who we were, but for what is left behind by accident. The earth itself holds such pale reflections, layer upon layer of sediment, compressed into cliffs, speak of oceans long gone. Fossilized forests are found turned to coal, their branches blackened into fuel for another age. Once, living sunlight soaked into leaf and bark. Now that same light burns as fire in our machines. Death here is not final. It is recirculation, a great borrowing, as if the universe cannot afford waste, and so keeps rewriting itself with the same ink. But if matter is never destroyed, where does the self go? Is identity dissolved like salt in water, no longer separate, but spread across a sea too vast to name? Or does something subtler persist, a trace of awareness carried along like pollen, finding its way to new bloom? There is a strange comfort in thinking of death this way. Not an ending, but a rearrangement, not an obliteration, but a return. Just as mountains crumble into grains that feed rivers, so too might we be carried along into forms unimagined. The isotopes in our blood may one day belong to stars. The carbon in our breath may fuel some other creature's life. And yet the unease lingers, because while matter is recycled, memory seems not to be. We do not recall the forms we once inhabited. We do not hold the stories of the stones that make our bones. Perhaps that forgetting is part of the design, the universe, ensuring that life always feels new, always uncertain, always beginning again. But still, we ask, if everything recycles, why not the story too? Why not the soul? Maybe it does. Maybe the pale mirror only looks empty because our eyes are too narrow to see what lies beyond. Just as fossils require careful light and angle to reveal their outline, perhaps the continuity of the self is hidden in dimensions not yet known. The pale mirror of death may not be absence, but translucence, a veil that only seems like nothingness from here. What if the mirror is not showing us what is gone, but what is waiting? What if the silence we fear is not erasure, but incubation? Could it be that what we call death is not a stop, but a pause in a rhythm so wide we cannot measure it? We are left then with this paradox. Death both dissolves us and carries us forward. It both removes and transforms. It is the cliff face eroding into sand, and the sand lifted by the tide into new shores. It is the fading of memory and the persistence of matter. The pale mirror does not lie, but it does not explain itself either. It shows us what is lost and what remains, side by side, inseparable, inseverable. And so we stare at it, trying to understand whether we are seeing an end or a beginning, and realizing slowly that perhaps there is no true difference at all. And yet, if death is a mirror reflecting something beyond our sight, then what of the shadows within it? What of the strange shapes that flicker in its silence, suggesting not just transformation, but something else entirely, something we have no language for, but which waits just at the edge of perception? When the ground shakes, the first thought is of plates grinding against one another, of ancient slabs of rock drifting like rafts upon the slow, molten sea of the mantle, pressing, resisting, then finally slipping, sending waves of motion rippling upward through the crust until cities tremble and rivers quiver in their beds. It feels mechanical, explainable, a chain of force and release, measured by seismographs that write their jagged lines like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Yet beneath that clarity lingers a softer question. When the earth trembles here, could it be trembling somewhere else too? In a place we cannot see, a place we cannot measure? What if every quake that breaks a coastline, every fracture that runs silently through a mountain ridge, is echoed across realities, mirrored by structures rising where ours collapse, as if destruction in one world might become creation in another? The physics of it invites speculation, for the laws that govern this planet are not confined to a single story. Energy cannot vanish, it can only move, shift, transform. When continents grind and energy is released, is it absurd to imagine that vibration rippling outward, not only through the body of our Earth, but through some unseen membrane, some hidden boundary between what we call real and what we call possible? Scientists speak of conservation, of entropy flowing from ordered states into chaos. But chaos itself may be fertile ground, a seedbed for something else, some mirror event we cannot yet conceive. Could the quake that swallows a valley here be the same pulse that lifts a new island in another unseen ocean? There is a rhythm to seismic time, a pattern too vast for the span of human memory. Fault lines creep silently for centuries before suddenly leaping, as if the earth has been holding its breath. Layers of rock that look stable are never still. They fold and bend, they fracture and mend, a living anatomy of stone. And perhaps, just as our planet has its hidden movements, there may be hidden consequences as well, places where reality itself folds and bends, where events echo and resonate like a voice carried on both sides of a canyon wall. Maybe we feel the echo here, but do not hear the reply. Imagine standing in a forest during an earthquake, the trees swaying in unison, the soil vibrating beneath your feet, and wondering if in that same instant another forest, not ours, but almost ours, is trembling too, the roots pulling, the leaves quivering, though for them it may not be a quake at all, but a surge, a birth, the rising of ground rather than its fall, one place collapsing, another ascending. Like two breaths taken in opposite directions, yet belonging to the same unseen lung, we measure the magnitude. We draw maps of faults. We trace isotope signatures in the rocks to understand past events. But the question of reality is not so easily pinned down. Earthquakes are reminders of instability, but they are also reminders of continuity, of cycles that never end. The ground breaks, but in breaking, it heals into a new form. If that is true here, could it be true elsewhere too? Could every tremor be more than a physical shift, but also a subtle thread weaving multiple tapestries of being together? Perhaps this is why earthquakes unsettle us so deeply. Not only because they topple buildings or shift coastlines, but because they awaken an ancient awareness that we are walking on something not as solid as we like to believe. Beneath our feet lies motion, uncertainty, transformation. And beneath that awareness lies another, the possibility that even reality itself is not as firm, not as singular, not as still, that it too may tremble, fracture, and reshape, echoing in ways we cannot yet imagine. And yet, if the earth itself can quake in two realities, if collapse here can mean creation there, then what else might be shifting in silence, just beyond the limits of what we call real? The oceans have always been our first mirror, a restless glass that reflects the sky and yet hides its own abysses. When we look into the waves, we see both ourselves and something far older, a language written in tides and currents, a script we have never fully learned to read. And yet, in quiet speculation, we might ask what seas would look like in a place not our own. In a mere world of dark symmetry, where the rules of light and gravity bend into unfamiliar patterns, would their waters rise and fall with the same measured breathing we know? Or would they pulse to the rhythm of something stranger? A satellite, not of silver, but of shadow, circling invisibly above their horizon. On Earth, the moon pulls at our seas with a patient hand, and for billions of years this celestial tug has shaped the very rhythm of life itself. The tides are not only a movement of water, they are a metronome for evolution, a subtle stage on which early creatures first ventured, from ocean to shore. But if another world were spun in symmetry to ours, balanced in some hidden geometry, what would call its waters into motion? Would a dark moon, unseen yet constant, stir invisible tides, raising waves we could never measure? Waves made not of salt water, but perhaps of some liquid, stranger than any we know. We imagine an ocean that shimmers, not with sunlight, but with another kind of glow, as if the molecules themselves release a dim radiance, a chemistry foreign to us, yet perfectly natural there. The winds might brush across it softly, scattering not foam but fragments of dust, fine as ash, settling and resettling with every breath of the air. Could its shores carry fossils too, fragments of creatures that evolved in the pull of another kind of tide, their shapes twisted into spirals we would not recognize, their skeletons holding isotopes not found in our periodic tables, RCs, our archives, recording volcanic ash, river sediments, the slow rain of plankton shells. Each layer is a page in the book of deep time. In a mirror ocean, what would those pages tell? Would its sediments trace the fall of stars from another sky, or the erosion of mountains we will never see? If carbon on our Earth leaves its shadow through isotope trails, maybe in that world another element holds memory, some unfamiliar atom marking the slow passage of epochs. And if memory itself is written in different matter, could time feel different too, flowing not like a river but like a lake, still and heavy, reflecting only what has already happened? The thought unsettles softly. For what is the ocean but a vast container of memory, holding every particle that has ever touched it, from ancient raindrops to the dissolving remains of forgotten empires? And if another sea mirrors ours in dark symmetry, it too might be a keeper of memory, though not a memory we could ever read. Perhaps its waves erase as quickly as they record, so that nothing is remembered for long, so that history itself is dissolved before it can take shape. In such a place, creatures might live without ancestry, without the comfort of lineage, rising fresh with each new tide and disappearing without trace. And yet, could it be that this mirror ocean has always existed alongside ours in silence, like the faint echo that follows a sound into the night, not because we can prove it, but because the symmetry of things suggests that what is visible is never the whole, that balance always calls for its hidden partner. We know entropy pulls everything toward stillness, toward an even spread of energy, and yet oceans resist. They move, they churn, they breathe. If a dark twin exists, maybe it is the counterweight, the silent equalizer, its tides falling as ours rise, its waves retreating as ours advance. We cannot say. The mathematics of symmetry is precise, but the poetry of oceans is not bound by precision. Perhaps we will never know if such a sea lies beyond reach, a reflection just out of sight. But still, the question lingers, soft as a ripple. If there is another tide rising somewhere, whose pull are we truly following? And if the waters we know can hold this much mystery, then perhaps the ones we do not know hold even more. And yet, if these oceans of symmetry remain unseen, what other reflections might wait in the shadows of the cosmos, mirroring us quietly, waiting for us to imagine them? If knowledge is never truly lost, could it exist preserved in the mirror universe? A library of all forgotten words, waiting in the dark for a way to return. Imagine such a place, not built from stone or wood, but from the soft sediment of memory itself. Shelves that are not shelves at all, but layers of time pressed into the quiet pages of rock. Each fossil a paragraph, each grain of sand a half-faded sentence from a story we have not yet learned to read. The earth itself becomes a pale library, not in marble and glass, but in limestone, basalt, and shale, the silent archivists of deep timekeeping. Watch while the living move above them, unaware. We walk across the surface of this archive every day, never hearing the weight of the voices beneath our feet. Yet within the mineral veins of mountains, within the dust of the ocean floor, secrets sleep that once were spoken by ancient rivers, vanished forests, vanished peoples. Every isotope, every trapped bubble of air, every shimmer of carbon tells us something not in the language of books, but in whispers of chemistry and decay. Uranium becomes lead, carbon becomes ash, shells dissolve into chalk, and even silence itself becomes an inscription. It is as though the universe insists on writing even when no one is left to read. But could it be that nothing ever disappears completely? If we trust physics, we are told that energy is never destroyed, only rearranged, transformed, made unrecognizable, but still present. If a thought, a breath, a word once spoken is made of energy, does it truly vanish, or does it remain folded into the great ledger of existence, waiting for another mind, another consciousness, to lift it out again? Perhaps we are surrounded by the residue of forgotten wisdom, floating in the air we breathe, etched into the crystalline structure of stone, encoded in the faint afterglow of the cosmic background radiation. The ancients may have known this intuitively. They spoke of memory not as something held inside the fragile walls of the human skull, but as something woven into the world itself. Myths of eternal records, celestial scrolls, heavenly tablets, they may not have been literal, but they carried the same intuition that nothing which truly exists can ever be erased, only obscured, only hidden. Perhaps when we dream, when we feel déjà vu, when we sense the uncanny familiarity of a place we have never seen, we are brushing against those hidden pages, running our fingers across a sentence not meant for us, but still lingering in the folds of reality. The earth remembers in ways we do not. Consider the ice of Antarctica, where layers upon layers of snowfall have preserved an unbroken diary of the atmosphere for hundreds of thousands of years. Within its frozen depths are the breaths of mammoths, the smokes of forgotten fires, the pollen of vanished summers. Each thin band is a page stacked neatly over the next, a library of air and time, fragile but undeniable. And yet, how many other records exist, buried too deep to ever surface, subducted into the mantle, returned to fire, erased by entropy? For every chapter preserved, how many volumes have been burned back into silence? Still, the possibility lingers. What if those burned volumes are not gone, but waiting? Could the heat itself remember, in patterns too subtle for us to perceive? Could the dance of atoms be a script, a cipher, a pale ink scrawled across reality, awaiting a future intelligence with the patience to translate it? Maybe every particle is already a letter, every vibration a syllable, every flicker of quantum uncertainty a word in the eternal book. If so, we live inside the text without ever realizing we are both readers and characters, walking paragraphs in a story too vast for comprehension. And perhaps this is why silence feels so heavy, why ruins stir something deep within us, why the smell of old paper makes us ache with nostalgia we cannot name. We are haunted not by ghosts, but by archives, by the possibility that somewhere, in some unseen ledger, everything we have done, everything we have thought, everything we have whispered in the dark is still there, unforgotten. What would it mean, then, if the universe is itself a library, not pale, but luminous, not fragile but eternal? Would it comfort us to know that no wisdom is ever truly gone? Or would it terrify us to realize that nothing can ever be undone? If knowledge is waiting in the mirror, held in that shadow archive beyond our reach, then maybe the act of remembering is not about recovery, but about alignment, about tuning our fragile minds to the deeper frequency already humming beneath. Creation. And yet, if this much can be preserved in silence, what else might be waiting just beyond the threshold of forgetting? Science has always leaned toward resolution, toward that reassuring moment when the experiment confirms, the numbers align, and the story feels complete. Yet here we are, circling a question that does not wish to be tied down, a question that moves like water through open fingers, never staying, never ending, only reminding us that perhaps closure was never the point. We are told to believe in beginnings and endings, in answers written like equations that can be solved. But the universe seems to move differently. It seems to whisper that truth itself may be less like a final page and more like a horizon, always receding, always shifting, just as we think we understand the mirror universe. How strange those words sound, as if language is already bending around something we cannot quite touch. For what is a mirror but a promise of symmetry? And what is symmetry but an illusion of order in a cosmos that thrives on imbalance? Perhaps the mirror is not behind us, nor ahead of us, but beside us, watching silently as we move, reflecting not what is real, but what might have been. Don't imagine for a moment that every particle, every vibration of your being is twinned with another somewhere beyond sight, another self that breathes when you exhale, that rises when you fall, that turns left when you decide to turn right. Physicists sketch it out as possibility, a twin universe with inverted entropy, where time itself may flow not forward but backward, carrying its rivers of stars from ash to fire, from death back into birth. Could such a world exist, bound to ours yet forever out of reach, a ghostly double stitched into the fabric of the same infinite cloth? Maybe, maybe not, but the thought lingers, because deep inside us there is recognition of mirrors, of shadows, of the sense that we are never quite alone, not because evidence has confirmed it beyond all doubt, but because our own nature seems to expect it, to lean toward the possibility that reality could be doubled. The very act of asking the question makes us participants in it, as if to wonder about a mirror universe is to already live with one foot inside it. You can feel it in the silence between your thoughts, in the flicker of déjà vu when the present feels rehearsed, in the pull of dreams that seem to belong to someone who is not exactly you, but also could never be anyone else. Science, in its discipline, admits the limits here. The equations suggest, but they do not resolve. The numbers gesture, but they do not answer. And in that uncertainty lies something strangely human, the acceptance that some questions are not failures of knowledge, but markers of scale. Reminders that we are small and the truth is wide, that perhaps reality must remain open-ended because closure would be too narrow to hold its weight. A mirror universe, if it exists, may never present itself in our telescopes or colliders, but perhaps its role is not to be found, but to be felt, to sit at the edge of imagination, keeping our minds awake to the possibility that the world we know is only half of what is. And isn't that the deeper lesson? that wonder lives not in the finality of proof, but in the trembling space between what we know and what we will never hold, that the cosmos, in its vast patience, is less concerned with giving us answers than with inviting us to keep asking. Could it be that mystery itself is the true constant, that the universe grows not by what is solved, but by what is left unresolved? And if so, what does it mean for us, these brief wanderers who crave stories with endings, when reality itself refuses to end? The mirror universe is not a conclusion. It is not a solved riddle to file away in the archives of knowledge. It is a doorway, and, like all doorways, it does not promise what lies on the other side. It only reminds us that there is another side. To step close to that threshold is to realize that answers may not be the point at all, that maybe the purpose of asking is to remain awake to what cannot close. And so we drift, carrying this quiet question with us, not like a burden, but like a lantern, flickering and fragile, guiding us deeper into the unknown. And yet, if this much remains open, if questions themselves are designed never to resolve, then what else might reality be hiding in plain sight, waiting not for discovery, but for wonder? Even memory decays, yet perhaps what we forget here is remembered there. Could the mirror world be our collective memory, balancing the erosion of thought with preservation? The human mind holds onto only fragments, yet we pretend these fragments are the whole story, as if the threads of recall could weave a complete fabric. But in truth, memory is porous. It leaks, it fades, it blurs at the edges until moments once sharp become like old photographs, their corners curling, their colors dissolving into a washed-out haze. The brain, much like the rocks beneath the sea, carries records, but only for so long before pressure and time distort them. Neurons fire, then fall silent. Synapses weaken, like rivers drying under the slow weight of heat. We call this forgetting, though perhaps forgetting is not erasure, but a quiet transfer in, unseen migration of what we once knew into some place just beyond reach. If every fossil is the memory of a creature, then every eroded fossil is the memory of memory itself. The limestone cliffs we stand beneath hold imprints of shells that no eye will ever see again, their outlines softened into anonymity. The chemical bonds in those stones whisper of ages, but entropy has its way with them too. Carbon becomes isotope. Trails faint enough to need machines to read. Ocean floors drag sediment deep into the mantle, carrying records no living being will ever touch. So much of Earth's memory does not remain with us, but continues its cycle, transformed, ungraspable, yet not lost. Could it be that the mind works the same way, that what is forgotten does not vanish, but moves somewhere else, perhaps into a mirror archive beyond our waking world? Time itself is not kind to memory. The longer the span, the softer the recollection. Civilizations rise and leave monuments, but stone weathers, language dissolves, and meaning fractures into speculation. Archaeologists kneel in dust, brushing fragments, trying to piece together the stories of people who once loved, feared, hoped, and dreamed exactly as we do. And still, even their reconstructions are only echoes, interpretations laid over silence. It is the same with personal memory. The details alter with every recall, as if each time we think of a moment, we repaint it with slightly different colors, until the original, is no longer what we hold. Perhaps this is the entropy of memory, an inevitable drift toward dissolution. But entropy does not mean disappearance. In physics, energy never truly vanishes. It transforms. So too with memory, maybe. What you cannot remember may still exist in some altered form, invisible yet intact, like heat dissipated into the air, like a star's light still traveling long after the star itself is gone. Could it be that another world, another dimension of thought, gathers all these stray recollections, every forgotten word, every unremembered dream, every story that slips away in the night? Maybe forgetting here is remembering there. Maybe our losses are someone else's archive. When we think of the mirror world, it is tempting to imagine it as reflection, a reversed image, identical but opposite. Yet, what if it is not reflection at all, but preservation? A kind of counterweight to forgetting, a shadow library where nothing is ever lost, where every moment remains suspended in its first clarity. In such a place, every childhood laugh still rings, every face, long gone, is still sharp. Every story, erased from the earth's surface, remains etched in some eternal geology of mind. And yet, if such a place exists, would we even want access to it? Part of being human is the tenderness of impermanence, the ache of remembering only partly, the beauty of what slips just beyond reach. If everything remained, perhaps memory would lose its wonder, its fragile power. Maybe it is, in the very act of forgetting, that meaning is born, because we grasp more tightly at what we know can dissolve. So we drift in this half-light of recollection, holding what we can, letting go of what we must, never certain if the forgotten has truly vanished or simply crossed over into that other archive. And as we wonder, we must ask, if so much can be forgotten here, then what else might be remembered there, waiting in silence for us to return? We end not with certainty, but with stillness, the sense that a mirror universe may exist right beside us, unreachable yet close. We may never touch it, but its quiet presence reshapes how we see ourselves, a reflection that does not shimmer like water, but rests in silence, almost as if the world we know has been folded, doubled, and turned inward upon itself. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel its outline, like the faint trace of a shadow on your skin, a place where the rules are the same, and yet not the same. Perhaps there, the mountains rise in reverse, sinking upward into skies that are heavy with oceans. Perhaps there, our own faces move slightly slower, the gestures delayed by the weight of another kind of time. Maybe it is not made of matter as we know it, but of echoes, vibrations, the remnants of choices we never lived through, but still belong to us in some forgotten way. It is tempting to think of such a mirror as only fantasy, a dream meant to occupy a restless mind. And yet, in the mathematics of cosmology, reflections are not dismissed so easily. Quantum fields suggest symmetries that our eyes cannot grasp. Particles sometimes behave as though paired with unseen counterparts, as if every flicker in this universe leaves an imprint in another. And if so, could it be that memory itself belongs not only to us, but to the twin structures of a cosmos, folded across an invisible seam? We remember because matter remembers, because atoms store their tremors like fingerprints. And if matter has memory, then somewhere beyond us, that memory might be rewritten differently, like a sentence read backward. The thought brings a strange comfort. We imagine lives we might have lived, not with regret but with gentleness, knowing that in some unfelt corridor those paths may still be walked. A child never born here might be laughing there. A tree we cut down centuries ago might still be standing, roots drinking deep, leaves catching a wind that will never touch us. In that mirrored place, entropy still unfolds, but perhaps in unfamiliar directions, pulling time into spirals instead of lines, into circles instead of endings. Could this be why we sometimes feel déjà vu? The sudden sense of repetition, of having already been here, already seen this. Maybe it is not our brain alone, but the faint overlapping of two patterns, ours and the one just beyond, brushing like wings in the dark. There is humility in this thought, for if such a world exists, we cannot cross into it, cannot measure it with tools, cannot claim it with language. It simply rests as possibility, and possibility is enough. It reminds us that the limits we draw around reality are not walls, only windows. We are not trapped in certainty. We are invited into wonder. And wonder, after all, is softer than truth, easier to carry into sleep. Imagine, then, standing by a quiet lake at dusk. The water is still, unbroken, yet it holds the sky. You see yourself, not in full detail, but as an outline, a silhouette drifting on its surface. You wave, and the reflection waves, not because it is truly you, but because it must. It knows no other choice. And you might ask, is the reflection less real because it cannot step away? Or is it precisely as real, bound to its place, just as we are bound to ours? Perhaps reality is not a matter of substance, but of position, of angle, of which side of the mirror we happen to be. In this way, the cosmos whispers to us about humility, that we may never know everything, that some truths lie not in proof, but in patience, not because the universe hides them, but because they belong to the silence itself. To search endlessly may not reveal more, only deepen the echo of our own footsteps. And yet, that echo is beautiful, carrying across the unseen divide, reminding us that being here is already astonishing. So we sit with the thought, a quiet reflection beyond us, a neighbor universe we cannot reach, a possibility that asks nothing but stillness. And stillness, too, is a kind of knowledge, not final, not complete, but gentle enough to hold in the dark, when words fade and only breath remains. And yet, if reflections can exist beside us, what else might be resting just out of sight, waiting for the moment we finally close our eyes?